Would you like to find more clarity, more freedom, more resonance, more power in your speaking voice with less effort? Well, if so, today's video is for you. Of course, I'm going to be talking about articulation, but in a way I haven't explicitly talked about it before, or if I have, it's been a very, very long time. So stay tuned if you struggle with mumbling, with mushy or muffled speech, and you just want to find more clarity and coherence in your voice. So this is regardless of accent, you can apply this to any voice. And even if English isn't your native tongue, you could apply this to your own language as well, because ultimately the voice functions the same, whatever language you speak. So before I get going, my name is Anuska Taylor. I'm an experienced voice coach and Jungian depth coach, and I've been training voices now around the world for over 15 years, training my own voice and singing and been in this voice world myself for over 25 years now. So I have seen so much. I've worked with literally thousands and thousands of people over the years. And my approach is quite unique because I combine both the technical, physical, sort of functional aspects of voice and voice production with the emotional, the psychological, because your voice is a mind, body, spirit instrument, and you can't just focus on one area if you want lasting transformation. So that's really what makes my coaching so unique and different to what most people offer out there in the voice coaching, public speaking world. Please do consider subscribing. I release weekly videos on all things voice related. And if you're interested in working with me, I do have my signature 8-month private voice coaching program, Speak with Impact. If you are ready for lasting, profound, personal transformation in how you show up, how you communicate, how you express yourself. So if you're ready for that investment, please do schedule a free 30-minute voice consult below. I would love to speak to you. If not, there's also many other options below, and you can also subscribe to my weekly newsletter as well. So let's talk about articulation. And as I said, I haven't explicitly talked about it in this way before, or if I have, it's been a very, very long time and probably long overdue to refresh this aspect of articulation. So let's take a step back first of all, because let's think about how we learn to speak. And at the very basic level, we learn to speak by mimicking those people around us, most likely our parents, caregivers, the people we spent the most time with in those formative years. And we're not just picking up sounds from those people, we're also watching, because children watch everything. We're watching how those people move their mouth, their jaw, their lips, their tongue. We are watching. So if you grow up in a home where no one really opens their mouth when they speak or their lips don't move, you are probably going to do the same thing, consciously or unconsciously. So many of our habits are so conditioned and so habitual, we don't even know that we're doing them. And we don't even know that we're sort of creating these limitations with our voice from a very young age, because we just think, well, that's what my parents are doing, so that's the way you speak. We don't give it any thought until, as we get older, we start to realize that actually our voice is really hindering us and limiting us. And so this idea of mushy, mumbled speech is incredibly common. And I work with a lot of people to really help them enhance the clarity and coherence in their voice. So then, as part of the way we mimicked those people speaking around us, and we watched what they did with their mouth and their lips and their jaw, one of the things we most likely picked up from them is articulation dependence. And what we're aiming for is articulation interdependence. And I'm going to explain this in a second. Don't worry if you're wondering what on earth I'm talking about. So we can think about interdependence as all the articulators are working together, the jaw, the tongue, the lips, the soft palate. Dependence is they're sort of relying on each other to function. And then independence, they're just doing their own thing. So of course, we don't want independence because you literally couldn't speak. If you need all four articulators to truly get the voice out. I mean, unless you're a ventriloquist, you might be able to get away with not moving the jaw and the lips. But for most of us, it's not an option unless you are literally wanting to be a ventriloquist. And then the dependence is where most people are. And this is where most of the issues with voice clarity come from, because the articulators are sort of lumping together and they're not working interdependently. So before I talk more about this, I just want to give you an example that's not to do with the voice, just to give you hopefully a bit more clarity around this. So I often use the analogy when I talk about this with groups of an orchestra. And so if you think about an orchestra, you have the four main sections of an orchestra. So you have the string section, the brass section, the woodwind section, and the percussion section. And so within each section, each instrument or group of instruments has its own piece of music within the overarching orchestral score. But then they come together as a whole to create that one beautiful piece of orchestral music. But individually, they're sort of playing their own pieces of music. Now, you could think about this in the string section. The violins would have one piece of music, the violas would have another, the cellos would have another, the double basses would have another. But then it all works together. And then, as part of the whole orchestra, it all comes together. Now, in a smaller way, you can think about your voice and the articulators as the sections of an orchestra. So you also have four sections or four key articulators: jaw, tongue, lips, and soft palate. And they need to work together, much like an orchestra. Yes, they have their own part to play, like each instrument has its own piece of music, but it's still got to come together to play that one beautiful piece of music. And of course, they have a conductor to bring it all together, but you are also lucky enough to be your own conductor and your own orchestra. So think about then your articulators, the jaw, the tongue, the lips, the soft palate, as those sections of an orchestra with their individual parts to play, but ultimately they've all got to work together. So this is what we mean by interdependence. It's not that the violins just play their own piece and it's like, screw everyone else, I'm just playing my own piece. So they become kind of independent. And it's not that they're trying to play the music of the oboes. They are playing their own piece of music, but as part of the whole. So I find this personally a really helpful analogy for understanding articulation and the voice, because your voice is a musical instrument anyway, so we're not far off thinking about other musical instruments. So you want to start to think about your articulators as having their own individual part to play, but needing to also work together with the other articulators. So they're not going to be independent, but they're not going to be dependent. They're going to be interdependent. This is key. This is absolutely key, because this is the only way your voice will really function freely, openly, powerfully, clearly, and you're going to access the most resonance in your voice. So let me talk about some of the common dependencies I see when I'm working with speakers and the voice. And I'm going to give you some examples and then some things that you can try and you can practice. So let's talk about the first dependence that I see. This is really common, and this is the jaw and the tongue. Now, in most people, and again, here I'm talking about people that struggle with muffled, mushy, or mumbled speech, the jaw is incredibly tight, and the jaw will often compensate for the weaknesses in the other articulators, namely in this case, the tongue. Now, for a lot of people, and for let's say most people, the tongue is very strong at the back. So often people have a lot of tension in the base of their tongue, and it can be very tight and it will retract. But they don't have the flexibility and the freedom and the agility in the tongue to really drive it forward for the precision of articulating words and sounds. So what happens then is the jaw will overcompensate because the tongue is not actually doing its job. And coming back to the orchestra, the tongue's not really playing its music properly, and it's sort of relying on some of the other instruments to carry it through the piece of music. So the jaw is not designed for this. So it's not going to be an efficient use of your articulators. The tongue's job, this is the tongue's job to articulate these sounds in this particular way. The jaw's job is really just to open the mouth so the sound can come out, but in a very relaxed and soft way. So what happens in this example then is if you were saying something like a na or a la, what happens is the jaw will do most of the work. So it might look something like this: na, na, na. And my tongue is kind of quite back in my mouth, and my jaw is na, na, versus the tongue coming right forward to the alveolar ridge behind the top teeth. And really with that precision, na, 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 na. So the jaw doesn't really need to do a lot. The jaw can just stay softly relaxed and open, and the tongue does the work. And as I said, for most people, when you struggle with this articulation mushiness, it's because there's no precision in the tongue. There's no flexibility. There's no agility. The tongue is used to retracting, pulling back. It's very tense. But actually, a lot of the sounds that we want to make in speech require the tongue to come right forward behind the teeth. So you can practice this. Stand in front of a mirror and try saying na, na, and la, la, by keeping your jaw softly open in a very relaxed way and just get your tongue to do the work. So if you want to, you could put your hands on your masseter here and just allow the jaw to drop, and then just see if you can see your tongue coming forward. Na, la, na, la, na, la. And then try it without your hands there. Na, la, na, la. And just watch the tendency to want the jaw to take over. Na, la, na, la. Now I'm exaggerating it. But for a lot of people, that's what happens because they don't have that precision with the tongue. So this is very, very common. That's just one example of how this shows up. And obviously, I'm just giving you a very simple sound here to practice. But given half a chance, the jaw will always want to compensate because it is so strong relative to its size. Now, another example, not really surprising, the jaw is involved in this one as well, is the jaw and the lips. So again, the jaw will compensate if the lips aren't moving. I've talked about this in other videos about the lips. Very, very common in people, again, that struggle with mushy, unclear speech, is the lips don't move at all, or it's really just the bottom lip. So they've got a stiff upper lip, the upper lip barely moves, it's the bottom lip, or there's no movement whatsoever. And so the jaw will take over, again, because it's the strongest muscle, or it's the strongest sort of articulator muscle by size. And we're so used to using the jaw in eating, etc. So it gets overused all the time. Now, in this particular example, what tends to happen is the jaw will often grip and tighten. The other example, the jaw might overly extend. It might also grip and tighten. It really depends on you, but in some way, the jaw is not actually being used for what it's designed to be used for. It's not really designed for speech in this way. So if we take the vowel oo, like goo, what a lot of people will do that have this kind of mushy speech is they won't move their lips and they will tense into their jaw, and it will sound a bit like this. Goo, 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 goo. And I can feel my jaw tighten as I do that. So what you want to do is round the lips. Goo, oo, goo, oo. And allow the jaw just to be soft. Goo, oo, versus goo, oo, oo, oo. Now, not only can you hear my voice isn't very clear, but it's also, it doesn't feel very good. Like there's a lot of tension through my jaw when I do it in that way. So again, I'm just giving you some very specific sounds, and you can do this, I'd recommend, in front of a mirror and just watch what you do. Now, watch what you do when you're not trying to do it correctly. Just notice what your general go-to way of speech is around these particular sounds. And I guarantee that there will be an over jaw involvement in some way. Now, again, with the lips, because you can speak without really moving the lips, even if it is muffled, the lips are often very weak. Particularly the muscles around the lips here are often very weak in people. And so it's really about strengthening the muscles around the lips, strengthening the muscles that bring the tongue forward, and trying to relax the other muscles. So namely the jaw, the back of the tongue, because they usually are overly working because, as I said at the start, that's really what we're just copying the people around us. So if no one else is moving their lips, and if everyone else's jaw is tight when they speak, well, we're probably going to do the same thing unless we've been trained otherwise. what's really important to understand, just more broadly with articulation, is in order for the voice to be free, to be open, to be resonant, to be powerful, you want as much of the articulatory activity to be as far away from the larynx and the vocal folds as is possible. So the jaw and the tongue are directly connected to the larynx via the hyoid bone, but there's no real direct connection between the lips and the larynx. There is indirect connections, but in terms of more direct connections. So using the lips is one of the best ways to really get the voice functioning in a much freer, more powerful, effortless way, because we're about as far away from the larynx as we can get. And so then the larynx is free to move, to vibrate, to have that flexibility and the agility. So when we're overly reliant on the jaw or in that tongue, in that very retracted position, we're just actually creating more tension around the larynx and in the voice. And so your voice is going to fatigue, but also you're not going to have that clarity and that freedom when you speak. So have a go at those exercises. Try both the na and the la and the oo, and just notice, as I said, what your default is. Then see if you can actually get the tongue to work interdependently from the jaw and the lips to work interdependently from the jaw. So we're not moving the jaw, we're just not relying on the jaw. Now, there's other examples, but these are probably the main ones, as I said, mainly because the jaw is so strong and overused in most people that it really gets overly involved in speech and actually creates so many problems for people. So we want the jaw soft, relaxed, released, gently dropped. It needs to be open, but not overly extended, but also not gripped and slammed shut either. We just want a nice drop in the jaw, probably 1 to 2 fingers depth, depending on what you're saying. So there is space for the sound to come out, but we don't want to overextend, but we also don't want to clench the jaw shut either. But if you want some help with this, you can book a one-off 1-hour session with me. The link is below. You just book a private 60-minute session. You don't have to continue with any private voice coaching program, but I can definitely help you with this. It's very difficult to do by yourself if you've spent your life speaking with a particular pattern and everyone around you is probably speaking in a particular way, which is why you're doing it in the first place. But it won't feel good and it will be very limiting when you're speaking. And you'll feel like your voice just lacks power and clarity and strength. And most importantly, it won't feel easy and effortless. And that's really the goal. It's maximum power for minimum effort. That's what we're always going for. We're not trying to hammer the voice. It's not about pushing and straining. It's about how resonant can we get the voice with minimal effort? How much power and richness and depth and energy can we get into the voice with minimal physical energy? Yes, you might have to think about this to start with, but you will get there eventually. So do reach out if I can help you in any way. If not, I will see you on next week's video.